The last time I played a card-based Lovecraftian video game, the horror at Highrook, I went on record saying that I wasn't really a fan of the whole occulty esoteric theme. Since then, perhaps in part because of that game, I've had a bit of a change of heart. I'm not saying that I actively seek it out, but as long as it's not too horror-oriented, then I think there's something there which does intrigue me. I'm still not going to go near anything like Still Wakes the Deep, but I could take part in a Call of Cthulhu scenario and enjoy it. That's about where I am with the genre. And as such, when Roots Devour appeared on my Steam feed, I was, as suggested, intrigued. It seemed like the right level of spooky for me. It didn't look like the sort of thing where eldritch horrors were going to be jumping out at me and giving me nightmares, but there's still something uneasy there. Looking into it a little more, I discovered that it's turning the genre somewhat on its head. Rather than fighting off an ancient god or simply serving one, here you are the ancient god. And look, I'm sure there's some other games out there where that's the case, but it's a new idea to me. And while I'm pretty happy with the hand I've been dealt, I certainly don't need unlimited power, but it does sound like it could be kind of fun, doesn't it? So, unlimited power. Well, not to begin with. You start Roots Devour as a bundle of roots hidden deep within the forest. These roots are, to put it lightly, irregular. They don't thirst for water, but for blood. So you'll stretch yourself out, grab a rat or two, and begin consuming. Gory as it sounds, appearance-wise it's pretty tame. Perhaps if you've got a better imagination than me, then picturing what the game is representing through its cards and squelchy sound effects is more easy and more off-putting, but, as indicated, I'm a bit of a wimp, and I think the strongest reaction it got from me was, ugh, that's gross. That's not a criticism, by the way, and we will get on to the criticisms, but a little disclaimer for scaredy cats like me to let them know that this one's relatively safe for you to play. So the name of the game is catching creatures and stealing their sanguine secretions. The blood you collect becomes your main resource. Every time you stretch out a new route, it costs some blood to do so. Effectively, you want to spread out as wide as possible without running out of blood. There's also a secondary resource, water, which you start each level with a small amount of. When something is just out of reach of your typical bloody routes, you can spend some water to reach that little bit further and grab a hold of it. Unlike blood, however, there's no reliable way to get more, and running out of it is often how your runs will end. I think here it's worth mentioning what this game isn't. I just used the term run, and a quick look at the Steam screenshots might start giving you that dreaded, here we go, it's another roguelike feeling. And yeah, there is a whiff of that, but this game is a lot more story-oriented than its appearances had me believe. Everything has been hand-placed in the game, there's no procedural generation. Other than slight changes because of the story, the locations remain consistent every time you visit them. If you don't finish a level and have to leave because you run out of water or blood, you return to a place called the Altar, where you can buy some upgrades with the blood you earned, before jumping back into the main part of the game. As long as you've done a reasonable job, you'll likely have discovered a checkpoint that acts as a different entrance to the level, so it's usually not a case of restarting completely, but there might well be a little bit of retracing your steps required. That's all fine, and I do enjoy the core mechanic, but there are some significant problems which begin to arise, and a huge amount of that comes from the fact that there is no option to save mid-run, which I find unforgivable in this instance. Let me explain. If these were runs that took 20 or 30 minutes, then it wouldn't be a problem. Not ideal, but I understand that save systems can be a bit of a pain to implement, and you could argue that it's not worth it in that situation. But it's so far from that I can't comprehend not having one. I'm talking sessions that can last upward of 3 to 4 hours. You're disincentivized from stopping in several ways, primarily because you'll have to rerun bits of story and parts of the locations, but also because you can, with some difficulty, build up an engine in a level, giving you an abundance of resources. Leaving and coming back means starting again with something relatively meagre, and no assurances that you'll be able to replicate it, or the knowledge that, to do so, you'll need to spend half an hour retracing your steps to get back to that point. As an example of the longevity of the sessions, I finished the second of the 4 locations in one sitting. I suspect I could have done the same for the final one had I not already been playing for hours, to the point that I just needed to stop. That presented another big problem with the game. Not only did I have to critically give up the progress I'd made in the level, but instead of clicking the confusingly named return button, I clicked the main menu button. My fault, I acknowledge. It does say that unsaved progress won't be saved, but that meant what I earned during that hours-long run didn't get recorded. Had I clicked that return button, I would have got the same "Are you sure to quit?" message, but instead it would have ended the run and given me those resources. Confusingly, and luckily for me, the unlocked checkpoints from that run did get saved, and so I used those next time to complete the game. Had that progress been completely wiped out, then Roots Devour would have sat unfinished. Alright, so I had to work a little harder than I would have liked for that ending, but what did that give me? As mentioned in a recent video essay on AI in games, please go and watch that in its entirety, I promise it is good and it's doing not well. Narrative is probably what I look for most in a game. So when I said earlier that this game is a lot more story-oriented than its appearances had me believe, you'd perhaps think that makes it more my sort of thing than it would otherwise be. You would be mistaken. The story is fine. It's localized well for the most part, and there is a decent overarching idea, but it's also full of repetitive, unskippable scenes which eventually became, for me, a chore. I don't like spoiling plot when I can avoid it, but there are only so many times you can watch as 2 little card-represented people have a conversation, fully with the knowledge that one of them is secretly harbouring a root monster who will invariably attack the other one just as soon as that dialogue is over. I won't deign to get into any plot holes, but it does end up being a story that you're trying to skip through to get back to the actual, enjoyable part of the game. And that's a shame, because it is fun when the game allows you to do it, and when you don't feel like you're being held prisoner to the idea of losing all your progress if you stop playing. If you were actually able to leave it and come back as you pleased, and you could skip over non-critical cutscenes, I think the user experience would have been massively improved. It would still be somewhat rough around the edges, with a handful of poor translations and occasional instances of Chinese characters slipping through betraying a lack of polish, but things that are relatively forgivable, and nothing that hugely impacts the game. If you really like the core mechanic, which I do want to reiterate is enjoyable, can accept the way the narrative is delivered, and are okay with sessions that you might not be able to leave for several hours, then maybe this one is for you. I do think there's promise there, but as it stands, it's difficult to recommend, and that's almost solely on the back of that lack of a save feature. Maybe that gets implemented in the future. If you're watching this a little while after it's gone out, I'd recommend seeing if that ever occurred, even though it should have really been there from the release. I'll put a little note in the description if I catch wind of it happening. For now though, Roots Devour is a frustratingly flawed game, albeit one with the potential to be significantly improved upon with some relatively small changes. It's awarded a 6.5 out of 10 by IndieLoupe.